Hello, you're watching Movie Snapshot Scenes, and this is the summary of Room. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The world inside four walls, to 5-year-old Jack, Room was the whole universe. It had a bed, a bathtub, a wardrobe, a TV, a skylight, and his ma. It was where he was born, where he played, ate, slept, dreamed, and lived every second of every day. The outside world, with its people and cities and wide-open spaces, was a fantasy he only saw on television. To Jack, everything he needed was within those four walls. He didn't question it, because Room was all he had ever known. But for Ma, Room was a prison. 7 years earlier, she had been abducted at the age of 17 by a man they called Old Nick. He had locked her in a soundproof shed behind his house, cutting her off from the world, her family, and her future. 2 years into her captivity, Jack was born, a child of violence, but never treated as such. From the moment he opened his eyes, Ma poured every ounce of her strength, love, and defiance into keeping him alive and safe. Every day was a ritual of survival. They had a strict schedule: breakfast, scream time by the skylight to call for help, lessons, exercise, and limited TV. Ma invented games, told stories, and created a world full of wonder for Jack within the bleak, claustrophobic space. She made sure he felt loved, even as she silently crumbled under the weight of her own despair. At night, Old Nick came. Jack was hidden in the wardrobe, where he couldn't see or hear everything. Ma tried to shield him from the horror, but she couldn't stop her voice from breaking, or the fear from showing in her eyes. Still, Jack never saw Room as a bad place. It was familiar. It was his home. He talked to the objects as if they were alive: toilet, sink, lamp. The world outside, as Ma tried to explain it, made no sense to him. He didn't believe there were real trees, real dogs, real people on the other side of the walls. How could there be? He had never seen them. But Ma knew that as Jack grew, Room would become too small, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. She knew she couldn't protect him forever in this cage. So she began to plan, not just for an escape, but for an awakening. Because one day soon, Jack would learn the truth. That Room wasn't the world. It was a lie. As Jack approached his 5th birthday, Ma began to change. Her smiles grew thinner, her eyes more distant, though she tried to keep their rituals alive. Reading, exercise, storytelling. Something inside her was shifting. Jack noticed. He didn't understand it, but he could feel it. Room was still their world, but for Ma, the walls had begun to close in harder than ever before. One night, when Old Nick lost his job and hinted that he might not be able to provide food or electricity anymore, Ma's urgency grew. She realized with terrifying clarity that their already limited world could collapse entirely, and if it did, no one would ever know they had been there at all. Jack, her precious boy, would vanish into darkness. Just another missing child. The world would forget. She had to act. But how do you explain to a child that the world he knows is a prison? How do you undo 5 years of stories, of carefully constructed half-truths and imaginary boundaries? Ma began to tell Jack the truth, piece by piece. At first he resisted. He shouted, cried, and refused to believe her. The outside world, space, cars, trees, people. It sounded like nonsense to a boy whose universe had always ended at 4 walls and a skylight. But Ma was patient. She explained that the things he saw on television weren't magic. They were real, that she had once lived in that world. That room wasn't the whole world, but a single place, built to hide them, to trap them. Eventually, Jack started to listen. He asked questions. He wanted to know what happened before Room. He began to imagine what outside might feel like. Could he see a dog? A real one? Could he run far? Could he scream as loud as he wanted and not bounce off the walls? Ma had a plan. She rehearsed it. With Jack like a game, he would pretend to be sick. Old Nick would take him to the hospital. There, Jack would reveal the truth and tell someone where Ma was. But when that failed, when Old Nick refused to take Jack anywhere, Ma adjusted the plan with terrifying boldness. Jack would pretend to be dead, wrapped in a rug, still as stone. He would be carried out by Old Nick and buried. But as soon as he was outside, he would escape. He would run. He would scream. He would find help. It was terrifying. Jack was scared. Ma was terrified too, but she made him believe he was brave. She told him he was strong enough, because he had to be. Their freedom depended on a 5-year-old child stepping into a world he didn't believe existed, and there would be no second chance. The day arrived like any other, but it was anything but ordinary. Jack lay still, wrapped tightly in a rug, pretending to be lifeless. His heart pounded in his chest like a drum, though he tried to remember Ma's words. You have to stay still. You have to wait for the right moment. Every second stretched like an eternity as he waited for old Nick to come. When he finally did, Ma kept her voice low, her eyes filled with desperation, masked as grief. Jack got sick, she said. He died in his sleep. Old Nick didn't question it. He simply muttered about where he would bury the body, carried the rug out, loaded it into his truck, and drove away. Jack had never been outside before. Not really. He had seen the sky through the skylight, but now it engulfed him. Light and space and motion hit him all at once. The sun burned his eyes. The wind felt alien on his skin, and the rumble of the engine beneath him was thunderous. He was terrified, but he remembered the plan. When the truck stopped at a remote spot, old Nick got out and began to prepare a burial. Jack seized his moment. He wiggled free from the rug and ran. He didn't know where he was going, just away. He screamed again and again, not the scream time Ma had taught him in room, but real screaming, wild, open, pleading. A man walking his dog heard him. Police were called. Jack, wild-haired and shaking, could barely form sentences, but through a blur of fear and confusion, he told them what he knew. A shed, a locked door, a woman named Joy, Ma's real name, and the man who had taken them. The authorities believed him. They found room. They found Ma. When Jack was reunited with her, it was like breathing for the first time. She collapsed into him, holding him as if to anchor herself in reality again. For the first time in 7 years, they were outside the walls, free, but freedom didn't feel like joy. It felt disorienting. The world was too big, too loud, too fast. Jack's senses were overwhelmed. Ma was thrown into the harsh glare of media attention, the weight of lost years, and the struggle to reclaim her identity. They had escaped captivity, but now they faced something just as daunting, re-entering a world that had moved on without them. Jack had to learn how to live in a world he'd never known, and Ma had to remember who she was before room and figure out who she was now. They were free, but freedom, they would learn, came with its own kind of pain. Freedom was not what Jack imagined. The world outside room was impossibly vast. There were colors he had never seen before, sounds that startled him, objects he didn't understand. Everything was overwhelming. Floors that didn't creak, stairs, mirrors, trees that moved in the wind, dogs that barked without warning. The sky itself seemed too wide to trust. At first, Jack clung to Ma, his anchor in a storm of unfamiliarity. He wouldn't speak to others. He wouldn't let anyone cut his long hair. He asked when they would go back to room, because to Jack, that tiny shed wasn't a prison. It was home. Everything out here was chaos. Ma, whose real name was Joy, struggled too. The world she had left behind had changed. Her parents were no longer together. Her mother, Nancy, welcomed her back, but her father couldn't even look Jack in the eye, couldn't accept that his grandson was the result of rape. His rejection cut deeply. Joy tried to adapt, to resume a life interrupted for 7 years, but the weight of the trauma crushed her. The media hounded her. Interviewers poked at her scars with rehearsed sympathy. Strangers called her a hero, but she didn't feel like one. She had protected Jack with all her strength, but still felt as if she had failed. For Jack, progress came in tiny steps. He explored the house, learned new words, met his grandmother's partner Leo, and discovered the simple wonder of playing outside. He formed a shy bond with Leo, who treated him kindly, without pity or fear. But still, Jack often retreated into silence. He missed room. He missed the routines, the certainty. The world was too big, and he was too small. Then, one night, Ma broke. The pressure became unbearable. The trauma, the guilt, the impossibility of feeling normal again. After an emotionally charged television interview that questioned her choices as a mother, Joy spiraled into depression. She attempted suicide, and Jack awoke to find her gone. She had been taken to the hospital. Jack, now separated from his Ma, for the first time in his life, had to stay with Nancy and Leo. It was terrifying, but something shifted in him. Without Ma, he had to begin standing on his own. He started brushing his own hair, talking more, exploring outside. He read books, played with toys, asked questions. Slowly, he began to engage with the world, not as a prisoner of the past, but as a child discovering everything for the first time. Jack was growing, and as he grew, he began to understand something no one else could, that Ma needed saving too, not from Room, but from everything that came after. The lingering shadows. In the weeks following their escape, life outside Room proved to be a harsh lesson in the complexity of freedom. Jack and Ma, Joy as she was once known, found that the real world was as unforgiving as it was vast. As they settled into the cramped confines of a small apartment with Nancy and Leo, the warmth of daylight and the noise of everyday life clashed with the silence of the past. Every sound and every smell stirred memories of captivity, and the two began to feel like strangers in this new reality. Ma's struggle was immediate. The sudden exposure to a world where every emotion was unfiltered overwhelmed her. The bright lights of the city, the chatter of strangers, even the routine bustle at the grocery store reminded her relentlessly of the monstrous man who had once imprisoned them. At times, she would freeze in the aisle, her eyes glazed over with a grief that seemed to absorb all the vibrant life around her. For Jack, a child who had never known a world beyond the four walls of Room, each day brought small wonders and new terrors. He marveled at the vast blue sky and the rustle of leaves on a windy day, yet he struggled with the cacophony of sounds that no longer held the comforting rhythm of captivity. Despite the new beginnings, the shadows of their former life loomed large. Ma attended therapy sessions, arranged by social workers determined to help her heal. Each visit was a painful reminder of all she had lost and of the guilt that gnawed at her. In the quiet minutes of these sessions, she often broke down, her voice trembling as she recounted the isolation, the fear, and the desperate hope that had once sustained them inside Room. Outside the clinical walls, however, Ma masked her pain with a brave smile, a smile that never quite reached her eyes, and left Jack feeling both reassured and deeply unsettled. Jack, in his own way, began showing signs of adjusting to the changes. He made tentative friendships at school, clung to new routines, and gradually started to articulate questions about what he now understood to be a vast, unpredictable world. He sometimes wondered, with a child's innate curiosity, about the stark differences between his memories of Room and the vivid, complex reality he now faced. Yet, there were moments when he would retreat into silence, overwhelmed by the unfamiliarity around him. During these times, Ma found him staring out of the window at dusk, as if trying to recapture the safety of the confined room they left behind. This apartment, crowded with reminders of a fractured past, a faded photograph, a discarded toy, a receipt from a long-forgotten meal, became a small battleground where the old life met the new. Ma was determined to forge a future for both of them, even if it meant confronting the lingering shadows of their former home. In the quiet of night, when the city had calmed, she would hold Jack close and whisper promises of better days, though both knew that healing was an endless, often painful process. For now, Jack and Ma navigated their fractured reality side by side, each step forward echoing with the pain of what they'd lost, and each new morning a tentative hope that, eventually, the lingering shadows might give way to light. Saying goodbye to Room. When Ma was released from the hospital, something had shifted, not just in her, but in Jack too. The time apart had changed them both. Jack had grown in ways she hadn't anticipated, more independent, more curious, more open to the world. He was learning to live without the constant need for her beside him. It frightened Ma at first, but then she realized that's what healing looked like, letting go, little by little. Ma tried to pick up the pieces of the life she once had, now with Jack firmly in it. She enrolled in therapy, began speaking more openly with her mother, and for the first time entertained the idea that there might be life beyond trauma. But she didn't rush. She couldn't. There were still days when the past clung too tightly. One morning, Jack asked her something unexpected. He wanted to go back to Room, not to stay, not to return, but to see it one last time. Ma hesitated. The idea of revisiting that prison sent chills down her spine. But Jack needed it, for closure, for understanding. Room was where he was born, where he grew up, where he lived every moment of his early life. It was terrifying and sacred to him in equal measure. They went together. The shed looked smaller than Jack remembered. The walls that had once been his entire universe now seemed plain, cracked, and hollow. He walked in slowly, touching the bed, the wardrobe, the tub, everything familiar, yet now strangely distant. The magic was gone. The illusion had shattered. Room was not a world, it was a box. "Goodbye, Room," Jack said softly, standing at the threshold. He didn't cry. Neither did Ma. They just stood there, side by side, taking in the emptiness that had once felt so full, and then they turned away. From that moment on, the world began to feel a little more open. Jack started school. He cut his hair. He asked new questions about life, about the stars, about everything. Ma took deep breaths and found strength in the small victories. An honest laugh, a walk through a busy park, the ability to sleep through the night without waking from nightmares. There would always be scars. The pain would never disappear entirely. But Jack and Ma were no longer defined by what had been taken from them. They had survived. And more than that, they had begun to live together, not in a room defined by walls, but in a world defined by possibility.